Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see, what if Issei become the isolated Joker? Part 2. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Gabriel, the most beautiful and powerful woman in heaven, had a scheduled meeting between a few factions. It was a meeting of messengers from the Greek and Norse factions with heaven about the means in which they would communicate. Routes to travel, where to be expected to exchange letters, pack a gaze, or anything else that was needed. They were meeting in the human world, an isolated island off the coast of New Zealand, as it was generally neutral territory. Auckland Island. The Hindu and Egyptian were the other two factions that had initially agreed to be present, but each had cancelled their presence, for reasons that were not relayed. Gabriel had thought that, being messengers, they would have sent word about where to meet with the other beings. She hadn't heard anything in the month that the meeting location and time was set. Teleporting herself down to the island, she came to the largest area of flat land. The large portion of Auckland Island was cliffs or hillside that would prove to be counterproductive when setting up a meeting. You couldn't make a proper setting without at least some level ground for the table and chairs. Nor could you expect a god, no matter what pantheon, to stand for such a potentially long meeting. Glancing from side to side, Gabriel looked over the grassy land, admiring the perfect weather as she did. The sky was clear, the sun shining down and warming her through. Truly a blessed land, this is. She whispered. Her favorite places in the world were those that the sun shined on frequently and with warmer temperatures. Gabriel walked to the edge of the plateau, looking over it to see if she could find any signs of other people anywhere near her. There was nothing, no sign of any other life beside her. She tried the other side and found the same thing. I am certain that we were supposed to meet at this time. The last details she was given specified as much. It was surprising that the Hindu faction had sent word for the meeting, they were among the more reclusive factions around the world. The thought that maybe the meeting was cancelled and she hadn't been informed never crossed her mind. Her dealings with the Hindu, as few and far between as they'd been, told her that they always stayed true to their word. Unlike the Norse or Greek. Those two factions often either were too laid back to send word of a change or just plain forgot altogether. Suddenly, a flare of magic came from behind her. Gabriel turned to face whoever it was, thankful that she apparently wasn't the only one that would be showing up. The strange white, almost colorless magic circle revealed a young man. The black hair, eye shape and combination of a Japanese school uniform underneath a layer of what looked to be Chinese armor told her that he was of Asian descent. Hello young man. A pleasure to have company on this otherwise empty cliff. Gabriel spoke warmly with her usual smile. The young man turned to her, immediately Gabriel could tell that he was the charismatic type. Which worked well in a messenger role. Whichever faction he belonged to had done a good job picking him. It was part of the reason the Heavenly Father had Gabriel as his messenger. Her smile warmed hearts, eased worries, and it radiated a peaceful aura that made people listen. Gabriel, of the great seraphs, I thank you for coming here today. He spoke. He gave a slight bow to her, a smile on his face. That smile made her pay closer attention. It was one that spoke of a hidden objective. There was nothing genuine about it. Our meeting will certainly to help spread word. He spoke vaguely after he raised himself. Gabriel tilted her head in confusion, even as her eyes never left him. Was there a change in topic for our meeting? I had been told that at least two other factions were to be present. He took 3 steps towards her before his right thrust out and appeared to be grabbing something from thin air. I apologize for the lack of forewarning, normally I'm much more upfront. But the events of recent days has caused a change in plan. Gabriel felt a holy presence form into the boy's hand. It was powerful and one of the purest concentrations she had felt outside of a high-tier angel. Wait, she recognized this feeling. The holy presence formed itself into a spear, its length being as tall as he was. The snake-shaped decoration wrapped around the upper quarter length, leading to the blade where the holy energy was emanating from told Gabriel what she was looking at. My name is Cao Cao, wielder of the true Longinus, and I am here to send a message. Her smile returned. She had only come across one other wielder of the holy spear before, since it was made into a sacred gear. It was a blessing to see. It is certainly a pleasure to meet the wielder of the strongest Longinus, created by my father. Gabriel felt the shift in the boy's power as 7 lights surrounded him in the form of orbs of light. Her smile being removed from her face, something that was rare to see. It's a Teratana. Cao Cao said. Gabriel felt herself immediately being restricted. By what exactly, she wasn't sure. Whatever it was that the Holy Spear had done, it wasn't a commonly known ability. The angel's collusion with devils and fallen was surprising. And ultimately, cannot be allowed. They are beings of evil, and those that willingly aim to coexist with them need to be eliminated. Cao Cao's face turned serious, the spear placed in both hands now and pointed directly towards her heart. Gabriel tried to summon a spear of light to defend herself. Only to find herself unable to. She looked at her hands in surprise, not knowing why her abilities were failing her. She hadn't had to fight in a very long time, but she was by no means rusty. Her light had never failed her before, why now? My hope is that your death will bring heaven to the proper realization. The fallen and devils have no place in this world, they need to be removed. Humans will lead the charge, proving that we are not the helpless beings the supernatural thinks we are. Cao Cao charged forward, his spear still pointed directly at her heart. Gabriel unleashed her wings, preparing to take flight if needed. She may specialize in light manipulation, but hand-to-hand combat was by no means a foreign subject to her. The spear thrust forward, and Gabriel tilted her body to the right, letting it slide by her. Gabriel jumped up to swing her leg around and kick the man in the back of the head. When Cao Cao saw that his attack missed, he rolled to his right, letting her leg come overhead. When he stood upright, Gabriel was in a fighting stance, her robe fluttering in the breeze lightly. What will attacking me accomplish? Other than getting heaven to search for you? Her voice held none of its usual happy tone. The battle-hardened warrior of the Great War was standing on the field now. One that had killed leagues of fallen and devils single-handedly. Her sapphire blue eyes narrowed towards her current opponent. Taking you out of the picture will make heaven rethink their peaceful presence in Kuo. It's truly a shame that such a renowned angel such as yourself has advocated coexistence with them. He didn't elaborate any further, wanting to get his plans moving forward for after she was dead. Cao Cao spun the holy spear around his body to be in his left hand now. I have many obligations after this, so I shall make your demise short and quick, out of respect for your position. One of the orbs that had been hovering in a circle above him shone brightly. Itsusaratana. Cao Cao vanished from view. Gabriel's eyes scanned the field quickly, seeing and feeling nothing. The holy presence appeared directly behind her a moment later. Gabriel tried to take flight, to get out of the path of the holy weapon. Ah! She yelled, feeling the blade scrape against the lower part of her back. If she had been standing on the ground, her head would have likely been separated from her body. As it was, there was a nasty slice where the blade of the spear had met her skin. Gabriel landed back on the ground 100 feet from Cao Cao. How are you able to lock my light powers? She demanded. My balance breaker. Polar Night Longinus Chakra Valdine. These 7 treasures allow me to combat even some of the strongest supernatural beings. Cao Cao pointed to the one that he'd used on her first. Itsusaratana seals any special abilities of a woman for a time. Your light abilities included. She widened her eyes at that. Without her light, hand-to-hand would be the only way for her to fight. Cao Cao pointed to the other orb he'd used. Itsusaratana teleports anyone of my choosing to any place of my choosing. Near-instant teleportation would make him a hard opponent even if she had her full array of powers. Without them, her fate would be sealed. The slash on her back was bleeding down her robes, she could feel it sting. If she wanted to get out of the situation, she would need help. If only. Issei was in the kitchen, making dinner for him, Rainer and Aya. It had been a week since the meeting with the devils. And with all things considered, everything had been going fairly well. He had found a 2-story house pretty close to the school and purchased it with cash up front to the seller. Blue exterior with a small yard out front and back. A balcony just off of his room. Just inside the front door led to the living room, and to the right was the dining area and kitchen, only blocked by an open doorway. Issei appreciated the newer appliances as they made cooking easier and more pleasant. The pork in the pan sizzled, the thin slices almost ready to be plated with the veggies. Ray and Aya were in the living room, watching some horrible reality TV show. Why would someone go on television to find their spouse? He had thought the same thing every time they watched the show. He couldn't imagine any scenario where he'd want his relationship to be broadcast for the world to see. Had to be a girl thing. The situation with the devils hadn't really changed all that much since the first meeting. The 2 girls in the Citri peerage were the friendliest with him and Ray. The rest were neutral most of the time. Saji still silently cursed Issei for having Rainer, but kept up a civil front. The 2 that Issei had talked to, Kiba and Akeno, would fluctuate. Kiba would go from his normal, Prince Charming to breeding teenager at the flip of a switch. Issei hadn't found the right opportunity to have that talk yet, the boy was still too unstable for it. Akeno was generally pleasant with Issei, but still pretty frosty with Rainer. The verbal aspect of it had stopped, but the looks would come around every once in a while. She was trying, just like she said she would. That was alright for now, but Issei really wanted to get them training, just in case. The food was done now. He plated the meat and set the 3 places on the dining table. Girls, food is ready. He called out into the living room as he turned and sat himself down. Ray came in, looking as happy as she had when the mission started. Her post-proposal high hadn't worn off yet. She sat to his left, with Issei at the head of the table. Aya came stumbling in, her shoulder knocking into the frame of the doorway. She glared at the frame, like it had wronged her in some way, before plopping herself down. She hadn't been in the best mood. The moment she saw the ring on Ray's finger, she had flipped out on Issei. She accused him of leaving her behind, of not loving her, of thinking she was a horrible person. None of which was true, not that she listened. She was the last thing he had even close to family, he did love her. And while she had her issues, mainly stemming from the trauma of seeing her sister dismembered in front of her, she was not a bad person. Issei could already tell what tomorrow morning would be like. He'd wake up, start on breakfast for the three of them. After chugging her usual 2 cups of coffee, Aya would apologize for acting this way. And like usual, Issei would forgive her. Because it wasn't entirely her fault. Her sister dying was a case of wrong place, wrong time. She could only recall the event because Michael had refused to wipe her memories of the event once she started to show side effects of the trauma she'd gone through. And no angel could go against the words of the one that had taken God's place. She'd promised to never use the dagger on him unless it was really necessary and they'd go back to normal. She was so sweet and loving when she was sober. Give her a few drinks though and all of those worries and fears came out in the form of a sex-craved dominatrix or a teary basket case. She'd bought quite a few accessories for her new habit lately. How did he end up living with 2 forceful women? Ray had surprised him by her request the day after meeting the devils. Issei was still trying to figure out if he was okay with giving it to her. Apparently her fantasy was to have him force himself on her. She'd already told him what her safe word would be if he was really crossing the line, even though she knew that he wouldn't. Rainer wanted him to slam her against a wall, rip off her clothes, and take what he wanted from her, like he owned her. Normally, Issei had no problem giving in to what the 2 girls wanted. But this was pushing the limits of what he was comfortable with. Even if it wasn't real and just a fantasy, it came too close to what the dagger turned him into. A tool to be used at its owner's command. When dinner was finished and Issei was cleaning up, Aya came in, resting against the frame of the doorway. He could feel her presence there, but just let her be. Aya stood there for a few moments, just looking at him, before walking over. Issei stopped what he was doing when she wrapped her arms around him, resting her head against his back. Something wrong, Aya? She didn't say anything for a while, so Issei returned to drying the plate in his hand. Don't leave me behind. She whispered. They were back to this talk again. Her insecurities were getting the better of her. Fuck Michael in all his 12-winged glory for making her hold on to those images. Humans weren't supposed to see the supernatural at work. Issei put the plate down, tapped on her hand to get her grip to ease up. He turned around and pulled her into his chest. He spoke softly with his cheek nuzzled into her hair. I'd never do that. She gave him a squeeze, then pulled back to look him in the face. Promise? Her gray eyes searching his for their sincerity. Issei nodded with a smile. I promise. She returned the smile, but it was more of a sly one compared to his honest and heartfelt. Good. Aya stepped back and grabbed onto Issei's hand, dragging him out of the kitchen. Come with me. They rounded the corner towards the staircase towards the floor where the bedrooms were. Aya dragged him up them quickly, coming face to face with Rainer, who had gone upstairs to change into a see-through light blue nightgown. She saw the look on Aya and smirked. It was time for their nightly fun it seemed. Time to play hide the sausage. The smile on Aya widened. Yep. And we're going until I know that Aiko will have to help me out of the squad car tomorrow. Rainer just laughed as she started to follow behind them, wanting to get in on the action. With any luck, she'd be in the same situation. Supernatural stamina added to a dragon's libido was never to underestimated. Maybe I should put the dishes away before we get started, Issei said. He wasn't against her plan for the rest of the night, far from it. But the kitchen was his domain and he liked to keep it in order. Aya stopped, Rainer coming to stand next to her. The 2 girls glared at him for thinking he was escaping their clutches. Nah, mister. You're coming with us right now, Aya started. Aya. Rainer interrupted. Issei had felt a pulsing in his hand that Aya was holding. Rainer saw the light emitting from it and her eyes widened at how different it was from the last time she saw it. It was flashing twice a second. Normally it would only be once every 2 seconds and be a dull light. This was a frantic bright pulsing. A distress signal. An emergency. And apparently an emergency that required the Joker. What? The human turned to Rainer. Seeing the fallen staring at the linked hands, she saw the red hat surrounded by the heart. Aya's face grew angry. No. She's been stealing you away much more than normal lately. She can go without for one more night. Issei looked down at his hand. This wasn't good. An emergency call had only come to him once. And after that, he had heard talks going around the upper echelon of heaven to only call him again if it was a matter of life and death. That's what he got from letting that stray walk out of there after defusing the situation. She had only been defending herself and not escalating things. And technically, Marana had been in the wrong. She had wandered into territory she shouldn't have. Ah yeah, that's an emergency call. You know how the angels feel about calling Issei in for anything. Someone is in serious trouble. Rainer tried to reason with her. The anger on her face didn't let up as she threw Issei's hand down. Fine, she growled, turning around to head to her room. You better stock up on vitamin waters and food. Cause your ass is mine all weekend. She turned around to face the angel being called. And I won't be gentle. With that she slammed the door. Issei gave a sigh. Great, just going my job and I'm going to have numb limbs for 48 hours. He turned towards Rainer, who gave him a teasing look. I've never seen a man complain about a weekend sex marathon before. He deflated a little at that. Yeah, well, most don't actually get to experience the friction burn on your beep as a result of it. Lube can only do so much. Rainer shrugged. We've never had that problem before. Issei grabbed his robe from the pocket dimension that he kept it in and slid it over his head. You're not human. Your body recovers the necessary bodily fluid faster. He closed his eyes and focused on teleporting to where the call was coming from. He was worried that it was coming from Gabriel of all people. The Seraph was sending an emergency call. What the fuck was going on? And why was she in New Zealand? I'll be back as soon as I can, Ray. Issei said as he reopened his eyes, preparing the circle. She stepped forward, cupped his cheeks and gave him a small kiss. Be safe. Be quick. And stay on guard. With a nod he warped away. When the light died, Issei was standing on a grassy plain with chunks taken out of the land. He heard a gasp from somewhere behind him. Turning around, Issei could not believe what he was seeing. Gabriel was being thrashed by a young man who couldn't have been much older than him. The holy feeling threw him off a little bit and he narrowed his eyes at the thought that this might be another traitor of an angel. That was until he saw the spear. The true longinus. And it was being used against one of God's first creations. Gabriel was on one knee, cuts and slashes over most of her body. Her normally pristine white robes were largely covered in her own blood. The robe had to have been cut at least 30 times, making over half of her skin be revealed to the world. The man stood a few feet away, just within striking range with his weapon. This is the end, Seraph Gabriel. You fought well. Gabriel stared at the tip of the spear fearlessly that was raised to pierce her skull. Issei leapt into motion, his wings bursting from his back and 3 rings of light coating Issei's right arm. The beating of wings caught the man's attention and saw the new arrival speeding towards him. Issei threw one of the rings of light towards his opponent. Once it got close, it expanded in size, large enough to circle around a mid-sized car. The spear wielder hooked it with a tip and launched it back. Issei compacted the ring that was deflected, catching it in his hand as he landed in front of the young man attacking his master. Alright shit stain, you're fighting me now. Issei declared. The young man in front of him looked at Issei for a moment before he realized who was standing in front of him. Ah, the fabled hidden joker. The children's crimson light. A pleasure. The smile plastered on the young man's face was exactly like when he fought Vali. But Issei was wary, whoever this was, they were well informed. He hadn't held that title in quite a while. Not since he'd been forced to walk away from Tosca, from the kids he watched over. Greg, time to go to work. He said to the dragon attached to his soul. The true longinus is not to be underestimated, partner. I know. And if he could bring Gabriel down without so much as a scratch on him, I'm not taking chances. Issei activated the gauntlet form of his boosted gear. Boost. Then prepared a technique he had only used a few times before. Mainly because he didn't want many people realizing he had it. The green gem on his gauntlet turned blue before 3 white lights shot out of it and hovered overhead. The light died down to reveal 3 small wyverns, about 2 feet in length, circling above them. Get ready, whatever your name is, this ends now. Issei shot forward again, his wyverns coming down to be close to him. Cao readied his spear, gauging what his opponent would do. He gathered that the small flying creatures were going to be used as a distraction, so he would have to take them out first. Issei closed in and pulled a fist back. Cao spun to the left and swung his spear at the wyvern closest to him. The bladed tip was just about to connect. Reflect. His spear flung back the other direction, almost coming out of his grip. Seeing that was all that Issei needed, he mentally commanded the other 2 to swoop in and tag the target. The 2 wyverns gave small roars as they banked left and thrashed their tails at him. Cao managed to catch his balance and dip out of the way for the first wyvern, the second one hitting him on the right knee. But Susaratana. Cao teleported himself directly behind Issei right after being hit. Divide. Cao stumbled as his power left him, giving Issei the time to turn around and launch another attack. Pulling his left hand back, a red ball of energy formed. His hand launched towards it. Dragon once it connected the sphere scattered into several smaller shots. Shot. One of the wyverns turned red as the balls of energy were launched at Cao Cao, preparing to transfer the gathered energy into the attack. The 12 small spheres sped forward, and the swift change in the battle was forcing him to reveal more of his treasures. Malaritana. He was losing the calm that he had when facing Gabriel. This angel was quickly proving to be a fighter that would push him to his limits. The spheres redirected to head towards Gabriel, who was gasping for breath, holding one arm to her shoulder to slow the bleeding. Her eyes widened at seeing the attack come for her. Her light abilities were still being blocked, so she couldn't form a barrier to protect herself. Fuck this guy. Issei thought, preparing to take it up another notch. The second wyvern came in front of Gabriel as Issei prepared more rings of light around his right arm. Issei prepared to time his attack. The spheres made contact with the wyvern. Reflect. Issei's attack was launched in a variety of directions, 3 of them heading back for Cao Cao. Issei saw that the young man was looking at the spheres heading his way, only paying minimal attention to him, thinking that the wyverns were remotely controlled and the bigger threat at the moment. Issei launched all 3 light rings at him, timed to hit just after the dragon shot. The bottom ring was set to cut, hopefully taking off a portion of his legs. The upper and middle were to ensnare the opponent for capture. Cao Cao scowled at the dual attacks and jammed his spear's hilt into the ground at his feet. A barrier of golden light coming down around him. The spheres, as well as the rings, dissipated after contacting the barrier. When the barrier receded, Cao Cao stood and looked up into the sky, seeing the setting sun. It appears I have run out of time. No matter, the message has been sent. Heaven will realize that peace with them is the wrong choice sooner or later. And just like that, the wielder of the true Longinus warped himself away, leaving Issei confused. The fuck? His senses told him that the young man was truly gone and not just hiding to get the drop on him. He turned towards Gabriel, who had apparently fainted at some point when he wasn't looking. He ran up to her and inspected the wounds. There was a lot of blood on her. Her skin was pale. Feeling for a pulse on her wrist, Issei could feel it was rapid and thready. Hypovolemic shock. He needed to get her out of here. Issei picked the seraph up bridal style, her blood getting on his own robes. Issei warped them to the 5th heaven, where the medical ward was located. The same white and gold was the main decor, as it was with all of heaven. His arrival made a few of the angels that were nearby jump in surprise. They scowled when they saw who had arrived. They didn't even notice who was in his arms. Issei rolled his eyes and yelled. "Will one of you useless bird brains get a fucking medic?" That drew the attention to the female body in his arms. The panic that set in was almost immediate as they scattered. Issei walked forward through the double-wide white hallway. A lot of the rooms in Heaven's hospital had been turned into research offices since the number of wounded had plummeted after the ceasefire. 5 rooms down was the first open room that wasn't an office but a regular medical room. Issei strode in and placed Gabriel down gently on the bed, turning on the monitor above the bed. It was amazing how much the supernatural had taken from human customs. Heart monitors equipped with automated blood pressure cuffs, pulse oximeters, CO2 gauges, EKG leads, IV pumps. It was all there. For sealing wounds, magic could be used. But Issei was never good at that branch, he was more suited for destructive kinds. Before Issei was more thoroughly shunned, he'd wanted to train to be a part of this facility, being a trauma specialist. He grabbed the trauma shears and cut down center of Gabriel's robes, enough to get to what he'd need, but not enough to expose her, along with a cut in the sleeves. He checked her arms for cuts, the left upper arm was free of injury, so he grabbed the BP cuff and placed it there. There was no doubt she needed blood, but he couldn't tell how much she'd lost. 78/40ths the blood pressure read as he was wiping some of the blood off her skin to get a better look at the wounds that were already starting to heal. Only the one on her other shoulder and her back would need a bandage. The blood pressure was low but hopefully wouldn't take too much for her to be back up to an acceptable pressure. Issei formed a calm circle around his ear, calling the Queen of Hearts. Griselda speaking. Issei didn't waste time with pleasantries, not with this woman. Come to 5th heaven, Gabriel's injured. He cut the communication off as she was starting to ask for more information. He would tell her when she got in the room. Issei was placing the heart monitor leads on his king when Griselda warped into the room, looking like she was nearly in a panic. And when she saw where Issei's hands were, she went from panic into anger. "What in the world do you think you're doing?" The hooded angel stomped forward towards her fellow brave saint. Issei didn't even acknowledge her, he was busy making sure that Gabriel got proper care. "Seems like it doesn't matter if it's human, angel, devil or fallen hospitals, make you wait for fucking ever." He grumbled in his mind. He was currently placing the heart monitor leads on her chest, being careful to block her breasts from his sight. The less the others had to hate him for, the better. His hand was snatched by that of the Queen of Hearts, tearing it away from the recently placed final lead. The heart monitor giving recognition of the signal coming through in a still rapid but proper rhythm. Issei glared at the queen, snapping his hand out of her grip and stepping to the other side of the bed. He pushed the BP button again, wanting a new reading to see if there was any changes. He turned towards the six-winged angel while waiting for the machine to do its thing. I was putting her on the monitor and cleaning her up. Issei faced towards the door and raised his voice so that the angels in the area could hear him. Because apparently my being here means it's okay to ignore the fact that a seraph needs medical attention. Griselda's blue eyes lost most of their anger and went back to the usual neutral state. She turned to glare out of the door, where she knew that the resident medic would be able to feel it. Seriously, what a fucking crock of shit. They can hate me all they want, but just because I'm in here, they take their sweet time. Bastards need to be fired. Issei grumbled as he grabbed a needle, placing a tourniquet on Gabriel's other arm. Griselda watched with an appreciative eye at his work. He was quick, efficient, and knowledgeable. Issei hit the vein on the forearm just below the elbow, attaching a saline bag and opening it up to free flow, hoping to get her BP back up into the normal range. "You've been studying on your own," Griselda commented. Issei grunted with a short nod. "School is boring as fuck. Just because this hospital won't take me doesn't mean another won't. It's still what I want to do." Griselda closed the door to the room and sat on the opposite side of where Issei was, looking at him as he watched the heart monitor. "What happened?" she questioned. 85-50 seconds. Better. The Joker mumbled, looking at the new reading. Issei shrugged towards the Queen of Hearts. "Not entirely sure. She sent me an emergency call. I showed up to find her and a guy wielding the holy spear fighting." Griselda's eyes shot wide open at the mention. "She was cut up pretty bad from what I could tell and couldn't lay a hand on him. I didn't bother waiting to find out how or why." Griselda digested this information carefully. First question was how Gabriel had been defeated so handily. She was a seraph, an angel of the highest order, defeating her was no easy task. Then there was the fact that she had called Issei instead of herself. It had been decided that the second Joker was a resource only to be used if needed. Based on the way Gabriel looked, it appeared to be the right call at least. "Did you kill the wielder?" she asked him. While she would understand that it might have been necessary, the other angels would certainly have even more reason to dislike him if he did kill the one who held the holy spear. Issei shook his head. "No. This guy was a cut above the rest. I brought out the wyverns and he was still putting up a good fight. Apparently he had better things to do." He teleported out of there as I was considering whether or not to armor up. Issei looked up at the monitor as it gave a few alarming beeps. Her O2 sats were down. Not dangerously low, sitting at 90%, but enough to do something about it. He got up and grabbed a nasal cannula, putting the ends in Gabriel's nose and turning the oxygen up to 4 liters. "Whoever this guy is, he's connected. He knew who I was. Called me the children's crimson light." Griselda crossed her arms. That left only 3 places that this information could come back to. Issei had been charged with helping children. The Seraphs thought it fitting, since he was a child himself at the time and could relate better to them than another angel. Just like Dulio, Issei liked to visit the orphanages and church control. While Dulio liked showing them different foods, Issei just liked playing with them. Children's Crimson Light had only come from 3 of those orphanages. 1 in Canada, 1 in China, and the last in India. It didn't even mean that whoever this person was came from the orphanage, only that the information had spread from there. It would be hard to track the information trail. Griselda gave the Joker a questioning glance. "Why call me here? Why not just talk through the magic circle? It seems as though you have things under control here." Issei sat back down, his eyes waiting to see that oxygen percentage rise. "Has your search led to anything substantial? Anything that might be useful? I'm asking because I don't intend to leave her here with these idiots. I called you specifically because I can't stand being around the others for very long and I wanted someone who would believe that I didn't do this to her before she can say so herself." Issei saw the O2 sat start to go up slowly, so he turned back to Griselda. "I'm sure you've asked yourself what happens if our king dies. Do our cards still work? Will that kill us too? You might not feel as strongly about it as I do, but I'm not leaving Aya and Rainer behind because I couldn't protect my master." Griselda hadn't seen Issei in a long time. 2.5 years by her count. She hadn't thought it possible that he could be any more disillusioned with heaven. Apparently, she was wrong. "I found nothing. The fragment seems to have just vanished into thin air. All I was able to find out was that its initial direction of travel was south from the UK. Nothing on possible suspects either." She watched as Issei's face looked annoyed, then worried, and then back to the expression that she was used to from him. Empty. "Normally, you wouldn't bother to ask about something like this. What's changed, Issei?" He rose an eyebrow at the queen. "They haven't told you what my current assignment is." Griselda shook her head and Issei snorted. "Figures. Angels might not be able to lie, but they're awfully good at not telling the whole truth. She clearly didn't know about the peace test. He knew it was secret, but to keep it from a queen. That meant that almost no one knew about it. Why would he think anything else? His missions were never spoken of. He was the Black Ops of heaven. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He was getting tired of shit like this. All of the sneers, the talking behind his back. All of it because of things he couldn't control. I wanted to meet face to face so that I could give Gabriel an update when she wakes up, also to try and piece some of this puzzle together. I'll take care of things here until she wakes up, should only be a few hours max. Griselda nodded, she did need to return to her search. She stood and walked over to the other side of the bed, preparing to transport herself back to where she'd left off. She put a hand on Issei's shoulder, making him flinch momentarily, as he wasn't paying attention to her. One day Issei, I hope to learn the reason for your anger, since you were confined in second heaven. You and I may disagree on many things, but I know that underneath it all is a caring person. Griselda stepped into the circle and disappeared. I hope I'm very far away, if you ever find out. Issei said to himself, still watching his king. The Queen of Hearts had a fierce temper and didn't want to be anywhere near that ticking bomb when it went off. Rainer was fidgeting as she sat in the orc, the other members looking towards her expectantly. Issei hadn't come home last night and had only contacted her several hours later. All he could tell her was that an angel was hurt and he was needed up in heaven because of the others' incompetence. She gathered that it was Gabriel or one of her brave saints that was injured, since he wouldn't have bothered staying if it were anyone else. It would also explain the emergency signal to him specifically. Only one of Gabriel's could have sent it. She had been getting questions all day about where Issei was. She just told the other students that he had an important matter to attend to. When the student council members asked, she could at least say that he was up in heaven for something and she didn't know the specifics. You really don't know why he's there? Riaz asked, a raised eyebrow as she sat in her desk. Rainer shook her head, feeling nervous around them all. It was a lot easier when Issei was here with her. In pure strength alone, she could take them all. But devils tended to be sneaky and surprise tactics had been proven to work against her. I don't. He said he was needed, nothing specific as to why. Rainer sat on the couch in her uniform next to the white-haired rook who was scarfing down candy. The devils could all tell that she didn't want to be in their presence by herself, while they themselves felt almost the opposite. Sure, Issei had come off as a trustworthy person who was truly wanting this peace to last. But he was still the antithesis of their race. Rainer was too, but Issei was the stronger opponent. So with him gone for the moment, the danger was more than halved. Riaz had noted how Rainer stepped into the room and scanned it 3 times over before sitting at the edge of the couch where she could see the movements of everyone inside. Tiba stepped away from his normal position towards the center of the room where the couches were. Rainer's eyes were immediately on him. A shame. I was hoping we'd finally have that talk today. Kiba said, sitting down on the opposite couch, crossing one leg over the other and opening a book. The half-fallen queen of Riaz stepped into the room, carrying a tray of tea and snacks for the group. I still wonder how it is that an angel can be romantically involved with anyone and not fall. Akeno said absently, trying to make it sound like she wasn't talking to Rainer. It was the best way she could keep herself held together if she just made it sound like she was thinking aloud. Riaz nodded in agreement. I was wondering that too. The two of you seem very close. One would think that there would have to be a physical aspect of the relationship since you're engaged. Devils and fallen aren't known for their celibacy. Rainer picked up the cup of hot tea, wondering if Issei would be upset that she told them. They had talked about many things that were alright to share. Rank, sacred gear, what their specialty was. His inability to fall hadn't come up either way. Plus, talking about Issei always made her feel more comfortable. I wonder what it would be like to be punished by an angel. Akeno said, trying to get a rise out of Rainer. They didn't know that he was already involved with someone other than herself, so trying to make her jealous wouldn't work. She was also very aware of the way dragons attracted people. But knowing that she would be his first wife made that pill easier to swallow. Depends. Do you want to be on the edge of an orgasm for an hour straight? Or do you want nipple clamps and a paddle? She thought. Issei was very open-minded. Implements of pain weren't his favorite thing, but if you showed that you enjoyed it, he was alright using them. Because the girl's pleasure was what he was most concerned with during any intimate time. She could only thank Aya for opening that door. Akeno, I doubt that an angel would be alright with the type of scenario you have in mind. Rainer spoke before she could stop herself. He'd be fine with it. Her eyes shot open and she clamped a hand over her mouth. The others all looked at her. Riaz and Kiba with shocked eyes, Akeno with a look of expectation. And Kaneko, well, she was always hard to read. But it said something that she had torn her attention away from her candy. They kept staring at her, waiting for more. Rainer started to squirm from all the gazes. Would you care to elaborate? Akeno was actually speaking and looking directly at her now. Too late to turn back now. She thought to herself. If she refused to answer, they would just badger Issei about it when he returned. Someone knocked on the door at that moment, making Rainer sigh in relief. At least this would bring the attention somewhere else. Enter. Ria spoke, using her heiress voice. The door opened to reveal the student council members. They must have finished whatever work for the day to be able to spend time here with them. The group stepped in, noticing Rainer, but taking in the fact that the angel was still missing. Hello Riaz. I see Issei Hyoudou is still absent. Sona spoke to the other king. Riaz nodded. Yes. Apparently called up to heaven for something. Sona, along with a few others, frowned in disappointment. A shame. I was rather curious to find out if he had an elemental affinity. Riaz and Sona both looked to Rainer. Seriously? They know he has a dragon sacred gear, it should be pretty obvious what his best element is. Fire is by far his best. Then lightning. He can only do the bare minimum with water. She answered. Sona nodded to that answer. She had assumed that fire would be more potent for him. Unfortunate. I was hoping to have a conversation about water techniques. Perhaps glean a few things to add to my own skills. Riaz nodded, then smirked as she brought the conversation back to where it had been before the knock on the door. You might not get any magical knowledge. But I'm certain our previous conversation will at least be interesting. Sona raised an eyebrow, three of the girls stepped forward, curious as to what it was. Ria, Tomo and Yura looked particularly interested. Oh? And what was the topic? Sona questioned. Riaz crossed her arms in a triumphant manner, looking at Rainer. Apparently, Issei isn't as innocent as we've come to expect an angel to be. I need to learn to keep my mouth shut. Rainer berated herself. Everyone turned to the full fallen in the room. The only male on Sona's peerage looked especially concerned about what she would say, not surprising, since he seemed to be as big of a horn dog as the majority of the males in this school. But it was too late to turn back now. She'd pretty much already let the cat out of the bag. Issei. Can't fall. She said with a sigh. Normally, Rainer would have reveled in the silence that she had instilled in the room. Leaving everyone speechless was almost always something to be proud of. But this time, it came from revealing her lover's secrets. She wasn't sure how he would take it. What? That's unexpected. Strange. Riaz, Sona, and Kaneko spoke. Kiba looked uninterested in that fact, while Saji looked pissed. His hands were shaking at his sides, and his face was turning red. The others were speechless, their mouths hanging open. So? You two have? Rainer nodded to the unasked question. Saji's face flushed a deep red in his jealously. Damn him. He gets light powers and can have sex with a hot girl whenever he wants. That's totally unfair. Momo slapped the blonde boy on the back of the head for being so dense. Apparently, the white-haired girl was getting tired of him lusting after Rainer. Akeno looked particularly interested now that she knew that bit of information. The angel in their school not only couldn't fall but had experience in the realm of her fetish. Have you and Issei been acclimated to that type of play? Akeno asked, not wanting to come out and say that she was picturing whips, chains, handcuffs, plugs, paddles and clamps. We've warmed him up to it. Rainer didn't realize what she'd said until it was too late. We? The entire group asked at once. Ah fuck berries. The only positive thing that seemed to come from this encounter was that Akeno was talking to Rainer while actually looking at her. If it took exposing their sexual history to the girl to get her to open up a bit, Rainer was sure that Issei would understand. Hell, she looked so much like me, maybe he'd drag her in with us. She had been asleep far longer than Issei had expected. Well into the night that he brought Gabriel into the fifth heaven, he had fallen asleep in the chair beside her bed. At least the medical staff had actually come in after the first hour. They saw that Issei had pretty much done all that could be done until something changed. He changed bandages, monitored vital signs. Unless something out of the ordinary had popped up, he was completely capable of handling it. It was now well into the afternoon the day after, and Gabriel was finally starting to stir. Her vitals had been stable, almost unchanging for 10 hours. Her blue eyes finally fluttered open, her breathing becoming audible to a human range. MMMM. She moaned from the ache of being in that horribly uncomfortable bed. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the scenery of heaven. She blinked a few times, remembering that this wasn't where she could last remember being. What happened? She remembered heading to the meeting and no one being there. Looking over the cliffs, enjoying the beautiful scenery. Gabriel shot up in her bed, her eyes flicking from left to right as the memory came back. The holy spear wielder. She looked at her right hand and tried to call upon her light. A small dagger formed in her hand, as perfect as it ever was. Gabriel gave a small sigh of relief, at least her abilities hadn't been permanently closed off from her. That young man defeated me. It was only then that she remembered who she had called and the brief part of the fight she had witnessed. Did I succeed? Gabriel looked around the room she found herself in, noticing that she had cords and tubes attached to various places on her body. Towards where the door was, she saw her Joker sleeping in the chair, snoring lightly. He didn't appear to be harmed at all, which made her happy. Issei stirred in his chair, opening one eye to check on his king. Seeing her awake, he opened both his eyes and sat straight up in his chair. "Have a good nap, master?" he asked, tilting his head to each side, getting a satisfying pop. Gabriel frowned, she really hated how he referred to her. Slavery was not her intention. He was dying when she came to him. Sure, it may have been slowly and wouldn't claim his life for another year, but it still would have happened. "Do me a favor. Don't piss that guy off again, alright?" Gabriel just stared at him, trying to find the right words to start a conversation she'd been wanting to have for a long time. It was embarrassing, really. She was the messenger of God, and here she was, having trouble finding the right words to deliver to one under her command. Issei took her silence as her not wanting to have idle chit-chat with him. "Right, down to business then. I stalled him long enough that he left to go do something he deemed more important than killing a seraph. Fixed you up as best I could after bringing you here, called your queen to fill her in and get an update on her search. She's got nothing, by the way. Monitored you throughout the night since the idiots here took forever to do anything." His neutral expression turned towards the ceiling, trying to recall any other important information. "And that's it. You should be fully healed in a day or so." Issei stood up, wanting to get back home. Gabriel stopped him as he was almost to the door. Wait. Her hand was stretched out, like she wanted to grab for him. When he turned around, she hadn't really thought of what to say yet, so she went with the obvious. "How has your mission been going?" she asked kindly. He rose an eyebrow at her. She had never asked him about anything before his report on a mission was done. If there was anything to report, he would have already mentioned it. It was how their relationship worked. Regardless, she was his king. She had asked him a question, and Issei would answer. "Well enough, I suppose. They've been accommodating. No real trust has been established yet. Two in the Citri peerage are more friendly than the rest." Issei's eyes narrowed a tad as he thought about one particular bit. "Although, it was news to them when I said I'm Drake's host." Gabriel widened her eyes. "You revealed yourself as the Red Dragon Emperor?" Issei nodded slightly. "Yes. Because none of you bothered to tell me that they weren't given the same amount of information on me as I was on them." This conversation was quickly heading where it always did. She would say something to try and break the ice, and it would lead into something that she and the other seraphs had thought would be easily understood. And as usual, Issei disagreed. "I don't understand, master. You want peace, you send me to this school to befriend them. And yet, you withhold information that could lead them into trouble. We didn't think that you would reveal yourself, you lose any element of surprise should things not work out." Issei scoffed at her reasoning. "Did the Devil Kings know?" Gabriel nodded. "Then what possible element of surprise would there be if things had gotten that bad where I needed to bring Drake out? Those are two of the Satan siblings. If an altercation broke out, do you think that those two wouldn't get involved?" He was getting angry again, and things had started off relatively well too. Issei gave a heavy sigh. He was tired and didn't want to argue with her right now. "Clearly we have different perspectives on this." Leaning back into his chair, Issei rubbed the bridge of his nose. Gabriel watched him sadly. She had been berating herself for the way she treated him for months now. If not for the way Azazel spoke of her Joker, she'd have continued believing that he acted this way to all of the supernatural. There was a tone of friendliness in the fallen leader's voice. It wasn't just his normal nonchalance either. He spoke as if they had been friends for ages. Then she was told about the devil that Issei was friends with, only further opening her eyes. "Why are you so angry with me all the time, Ice? All I want is to fix things." She needed to know. After the revelation given to her, she had seen the way he interacted with the fallen angel woman that he was now betrothed to. She had been looking for ways to atone for her wrongdoings. The way that Issei had suggested wasn't in her power. And she had no other ideas so far. Issei opened his eyes, one eyebrow raised, like the question should have had an obvious answer. "Seriously? You don't even have a clue? You took away my humanity without my permission. You told me you only did it because of Drake. You imprisoned me because I wanted to save the lives of children being murdered by a deranged church official and a rogue angel turned fallen." His voice was getting more heated as he listed off the offenses. "You turned me into an at-will slave for Aya. You risk my life with crazy-ass missions because the others can't be lost. I was a child in your care and I was treated like I didn't matter. You and the Seraphs made me turn away from Tosca and filled her head with bullshit. How dare you let her think that I don't care about her? And all because you were afraid of what I could do? What might happen if I became stronger than Michael or Dulio? This was the only time he would speak any more than was necessary to get his point across. When he had forgotten his self-imposed rule of how he dealt with any of the other angels. Drake's presence in his soul made him prone to emotional responses more so than anyone else in heaven. Dragons were creatures that acted on urges and instinct. And that was a large part of why Michael had the Siren's dagger crafted. After his altercation with the White Dragon Emperor, all of the Seraphs had agreed that the dagger had indeed been a worthy investment. Sadly, herself included. The anger in his face and voice was all well-founded, she knew that. Well? Anything to say? You say you want to fix our relationship, an explanation is a start. Gabriel was stunned silent for a moment. He actually wanted to hear her side. After he was placed on the blacklist for public duties, he'd never wanted to hear anything other than his new orders. The angels that interact with believers need to be true to the faith. Heaven needs those prayers in assisting Michael to power the system. Issei sat forward in his chair, his hands laced together, elbows on his thighs as his chin rested against his knuckles. Have I not been faithful to you? Angry at you all or not, I've done what you ask at every turn. Gabriel had to wonder, if God were still alive today, what would he have done in response to Issei's case? The worry that he could overthrow the throne of heaven would have been greatly reduced. Following that line of thought, the Holy Sword project probably would have never resulted in his incarceration. The dagger never made. Issei's position as a guardian, never revoked. But then again, if God were alive, Issei would have never become an angel. He'd be dead. Gabriel brought herself back to giving Issei an answer. You have eyes. None of the Seraphs doubt your loyalty. But you do not live your life by the words of our Father. Issei snorted. Yeah, I wonder why. The messenger of God steeled herself to try and justify at least part of their actions. Please understand. There's never been an angel like you before. Your sacred gear has the possibility to threaten the stability of heaven, something that we can't leave to chance. We needed a failsafe to make sure that never came to be. Issei stood up from his chair, having heard enough for now. He didn't even care to get any information on her assailant anymore. If you knew me at all, Gabriel, you'd know that I would never do that. He walked over to the door and stopped to get one last thing off his chest. Gabriel wanted to smile, it was the first time he'd used her name in 5 years. But she knew that was inappropriate right now. I've been trying to let it all go and just forgive you. And then I remember the Holy Sword Project, Fried Selzen, the Holy Maiden, Zenobia, Vali's Juggernaut Drive. Issei turned around, looking at his king. His voice sounded as tired as he looked. Each time, you chose their side over mine. Each time I was proven to be in the right. But nothing changes. It used to be painful, seeing you take the Seraph side. Now it's just exhausting hoping that it'll ever be different. Issei teleported back to the orc room, figuring that since school hadn't been out for that long yet, Rainer would still be there. She was the first person he saw, sitting on the edge of the couch closest to the door. Her face relaxed when she saw him appear from the cross. Other than the ever-present lustful look that Saji gave her, the rest had been fine. It was just a habit of hers to be nervous around devils by herself. Issei smiled towards Ray. Hey Ray. I hope your day went well. She nodded, then Issei saw the stares that he was getting from the rest. And then Rainer appeared to be sinking herself into the couch, trying to become invisible or something by molding herself to it. Issei looked round the room, both peerages staring at him. And Saji looking just as pissed as he did that first day at lunch. What could have happened while I was gone to be treated like this all of a sudden? He thought. He hadn't hurt or threatened any of them. He doubted he'd be getting looks like this if Ray had done it. He checked himself over really quickly. His clothes looked a little slept in. But that didn't add up either. Looking at his fiancée, it clicked. Ray. Issei said slowly. She gave him the sweetest smile she could muster. Yes. Issei crossed his arms, tapping his fingers against a forearm. What did you say to them? I haven't been stared at like this since the campfire night. A few of the devils looked interested in whatever story was attached to that comment. Maybe they're just in awe of the flashy entrance. Ray tried to evade giving up the answer. Based on the looks he was getting, particularly from Saji, that was highly unlikely. Issei sighed and sat on the couch with her. He leaned back and closed his eyes, this was much better than the stiff chair in the medical ward in heaven. The room was still silent. As his body felt like a wound-up spring from the tension built up over the last 24 hours, he posed the question to the rest in the room. Since Ray seems reluctant to tell me what she said, anyone care to fill me in? There was a shuffling sound behind him. 2 hands laid themselves on his collarbone and started kneading away the stress. Based on the feeling of the slender fingers and the soft round objects pressing lightly into the back of his head, it was either Ria's, Akeno or Tsubaki. Ria's had been sitting at her desk last he looked. and Tsubaki seemed like the least likely to do something like this. So that left Akeno. Akeno, your hands are fucking magical. Issei groaned out. The way she rolled her fingers along the knots was pure bliss. The hand stopped for a moment before continuing. She must have been surprised that he had guessed it was her so quickly without looking. And how did you guess it was me? Her tone was playful, like she wanted him to admit that he had been checking her out all week or something. Issei guessed that she must still be looking to get Ray jealous or something, or to fluster him. Good luck with that. Based on the position of your fingers and your breasts pressing against my head, it could only be Urias or Tsubaki. Pervert. He could hear Kaneko mutter. Issei gave a pleased groan as he responded to the accusation. I have a healthy appreciation of the female body, thank you very much. He debunked her words with a clinical reasoning that surprised the devils at how paranoid it sounded. I make it a habit to remember body types, never know who you'll meet in a dark alley. He gave another groan, then elaborated just how it was that he knew that Ria's queen was the culprit. The three of them are within 2 inches of each other in height, then you add in the angle of her fingers. If her breasts were smaller, they'd be angled in more, that eliminates Yura. Which would have been the only other choice. Out of those 3, Ria's was raised as an heiress, we haven't known each other long enough for her to do something like that. Tsubaki hasn't uttered a single word to me all week. And Akeno seems like the teasing type. Seemed like the most logical choice to me. Akeno chuckled as the others were all surprised by the quick deduction. So Akeno, what did Ray say while I was busy? The massage stopped and he could feel her leaning in closer to him. He felt her breath on his ear as she whispered. She mentioned that your relationship is quite fiscal. He could feel her pouting towards him when he didn't do anything other than give a nod and affirmative grunt. Ah. Surprised it took this long. Rainer pinched him on the ribs at the slight. She knew she was bad at letting things slip when she was nervous or uncomfortable. He didn't need to rub it in. How much did she say exactly? He was more curious than anything. It was her that cared more about them finding out about their sex life. Issei thought it would make him more relatable to the devils, since their species often went with whatever fetish they had and ran with it. But you're screwing her and your guardian in some kinky S&M dungeon. Saji sounded so proud of himself, like the words would be taken in a negative context. He hadn't been a devil long, so his human mindset was still more prevalent. Once he was exposed to some of the things that devils got up to, S&M would seem like child's play. Issei opened his eyes and sat up, staring directly at Saji for a moment before giving them all the same look. Let me make a few things very clear. His voice was low and threatening. First, guardian and adopted parent are 2 very different things. And second, you leave her out of this. The last part sounded like a gravelly growl. The protectiveness was felt by all. I don't think a bedroom can really be called a dungeon anyway. He said offhandedly, closing his eyes again and hoping Akeno would continue the massage. Rainer gave a sigh of relief, the chance of him getting angry had been low, but still there. Aya was a human and hardly able to protect herself against even a minor supernatural force. Saji. Sona yelled at her pawn. She was getting tired of his jealous behavior. The blonde boy snapped straight at the tone she used. The Citri devil gave him a glare that promised pain. Your disrespect will not be tolerated further. Keep yourself in line. Yes ma'am. The tension started to ease in the room and some idle chatter was shared between the devils, who occasionally asked either him or Rainer a question. Hyoudou? Sona called to him, he opened his eyes again. And he was so close to falling asleep with Akeno's tender mercies too. What's on your mind, Kaichu? Sona pushed her glasses back into position and crossed her legs one over the other. I asked Rainer earlier. She mentioned that you know some water magic. Would you be willing to compare techniques, maybe we could learn a thing or two from each other. The light bulb went off in his head. He'd been thinking of a way to bring it up all week without it coming off as alarming. After the attack on Gabriel though, he wasn't so concerned about that. They should be alarmed. Sure thing. I can only really do that bare minimum with it though. Issei tapped his chin, trying to make it sound like this was a spur-of-the-moment idea instead of something he'd been planning all along. Actually, why don't we just do an overall training? I was always taught that you learn more about a person as they put their all into a fight than just through conversation. Riaz perked up at the mention, seeing an opportunity to be presenting itself to her. She saw that her queen was looking at her, clearly thinking the same thing. If he can help us get stronger, I might have a chance to break free. Akeno was already a part of her family when she found out about the arranged marriage. Just the other day, they went through the contract in its entirety and found one loophole she could use. A rating game. She could fight for her freedom. There were 2 glaring problems though. Riser was nearly undefeated and had a full peerage. She had 4 members, one of which was sealed away. Even if she had a full peerage, there was still Riser himself and his regeneration. As Riaz was mentally deliberating on how to use this training to free herself, Sona continued the conversation. Not that I mind the idea, but what purpose would this serve in relation to our factions? It will show that we're not just saying that we want peace, but actively doing something to preserve it. We train to better not only ourselves, but to fight beside each other. Make no mistake, at some point, someone is going to come along that doesn't like the idea of the three factions being at peace. They will come here to try and disrupt it. As Sona looked over to see what Riaz thought about the idea, she saw that her friend and fellow king was spacing out. When they each found out about this test, that was a thought that came up. One group that for certain would want to do something to stop any peace from coming would be the old Satan faction. They both knew that others would share the same mindset. Plus, if either of you ever plan on getting in that raiding game scene the underworld seems to love so much, wouldn't it be a good idea to start preparing now? Riaz came out of her introspection and her eyes bore into Issei, wondering if he had figured out what her current problem was. He had been given much more information than her or Sona, so they couldn't rule it out. Maybe he was baiting her into saying something. Issei saw the way the Redeed looked at him suddenly. And wondered if she was related to the side objective that Gabriel had given him. She wouldn't have told him about it when she did if it didn't pertain to his current situation. There was one thing he knew that all devils respected and listened to. Power. A show of strength was more effective than the best logical argument. The way that Riaz looked at him made Issei think that she was the one that would need that show of power. But why? Aya rubbed at her temples, trying futilely to get the throbbing to go away. Maybe if you didn't drink yourself under the table last night, you wouldn't be so hungover. Her partner Aiko said teasingly. Aiko Kagari was just a tad taller than her and a year younger. She had taken to dyeing her shoulder-length hair maroon for reasons that Aya didn't understand. Although it did look nice with her forest green eyes. They had been partners for just over 2 years now, one of the only female-only duo in the department. Glaring at her partner for a moment, Aya popped a few painkillers and took a large drink from her blended hangover killer, draining the rest from the shaker cup. The base of it was a sports drink loaded with vitamins, antioxidants, electrolytes. Then 2 eggs were cracked and added, followed by squeezing a lemon, dripping in some of her favorite organic honey. And then finally, a touch of ginger. The concoction tasted horrible, but it usually brought her back up to a semi-normal state in an hour or so. I was pissed off and needed a drink to cool down. Aya grumbled quietly, since a louder volume would only make the throbbing between her ears worse. Pulling into the parking lot of an empty department store, Aiko gave her partner a curious glance after stopping, keeping the battery of the car on to listen to the radio for any needed responses. It doesn't seem you stopped at one drink. Aya pulled the handle to recline her seat as far it would go, looking to rest a bit and let the drink work its magic. She didn't answer the remark from Aiko. She tried to clear her head, as thinking about why she was upset only made her stomach queasy and head throb. There was silence for about 10 minutes. It wasn't uncomfortable, the two of them were able to just be around each other, with no need for idle noise. Are you mad at Issei for something? Aiko spoke up, her curiosity finally getting the better of her. Aya groaned as she sat back up, pushing her sunglasses to stay in place. No, yes, maybe. Raising an eyebrow, Aiko waited for the rest of the answer. Sighing, the hungover woman gave in to her partner's silent demand. I'm a little upset with him, but more so with Gabriel. She's left him alone for the past 6 months and he'd been pretty happy. She's called for him 3 times in the last week. Each time he comes back in a sour mood. Aiko nodded, knowing that the woman Aya talked about was the source of many of the young man's problems. Being stuck in close contact with someone for hours on end usually meant that you shared a lot about your life with each other after a while. What did Issei do that you're mad at him? Aya sank back into her seat, an angry look on her face. Proposed to Ray. She said quietly. Aiko was stunned, her eyes wide. At least now she understood what part of the problem was. Aya had a near obsession with Issei, from what she could tell. The woman almost never went out for drinks with coworkers and always went straight home to be with him. There were 2 occasions where she'd been able to get her partner to go out with a few other officers. Both of which were when Issei had been out somewhere. Each of those times, Aya had nearly broken the hands of a man that had gotten a little handsy. They had apparently thought she was just playing hard to get when she said she wasn't interested. I thought you said that it wasn't a serious relationship between them. More of a friends with benefits kinda thing. Aiko had at first been a little uneasy about the relationship between her partner and the young man she'd taken care of. That was until the 2 of them had run into an opponent neither were capable of handling. Then she understood the situation much better. Aiko lost herself in thought as the memory came flooding back. Flashback. Her and Aya had gotten a call for a well-being check at a large house on the east side of the area they were covering that day. A long driveway that ended in a circle, with a stone fountain in the center of it. The house was a three-story with a brick face, large bay windows on either side of the door. Pulling up, the two of them saw that the door was slightly opened and proceeded with caution. Apparently the old man that lived in the house hadn't been seen or heard from in a while. And the neighbors he usually saw every other day were getting worried. Aya went to the door first, Aiko just behind her. They opened the door slowly, making their way inside as quietly as possible. With the sharp gouges in the hardwood floor and in the wall, they were certain something had gone wrong here. The only room that seemed strange, other than the marks seen just inside the door, was in the kitchen. All the drawers were pulled open, knives, spoons, forks, and other utensils were all over the place. It looked like someone was digging for something frantically. Walking back to the front, the two of them proceeded up the stairs, weapons drawn and ready just in case. The second floor was swept carefully, finding nothing. Dusty bedrooms that hadn't been used in probably over a decade, an office with so much clutter that a path needed to be formed to get to the other side. The third floor, Aiko finally saw what her coworkers had meant when they said that Aya had nerves of steel. Coming to the landing on the top floor, the women stepped alongside the right wall, checking each doorway as they went. As they got closer to the end, Aya stopped them. Upon listening closely, a crunching sound could be heard. They both released the safety on their weapons, preparing themselves. "Freeze. Police," is what they would have said after coming inside. But the words were silenced by the beast they saw, gnawing on the corpse of what had once been the old man they'd heard about. The thing before them was large and bulky, dark green patches on its skin. It had taken off the man's leg and turned to them as it was bringing it up to its mouth to eat it. Seeing two human women in front of it, the beast stood up, snarling dangerously. It had the remnants of what looked like fairly expensive clothing, but it was too ripped and dirty to really tell. When at its full height, the monster stood at what must have been 8 feet. Its face looked like a mix between a monkey and a lizard, its orange glowing eyes just staring at them like its next meal. Aya raised her gun too at the monster's chest. "Don't you fucking move," her words were ice cold. Aiko couldn't do anything but stare at it in frozen horror. Never had she seen something so grotesque. What looked to be a smirk came over its face, then it lunged at the two of them with a speed that neither could match. Aya fired 3 shots that met empty air. The beast reappeared in front of them, one arm already in a swinging motion. It slammed into both of their bodies, sending them to the wall on the side of the room and collapsing to the ground in pain. Aiko opened one eye and saw the monster stalking towards them. Panic started to set in, not wanting to meet the same fate of the man they came to check on. Aya had started to stir, but their enemy was already upon them. The flash of golden light came from her partner once Aya opened her eyes in a glare. An ornate dagger came slashing at the monster's arm that was reaching down to grab Aya. The thing caught her wrist effortlessly, giving Aiko the chance to see the weapon that had come from nowhere. The gold handle, with a large emerald embedded at the rounded bottom. The blade was serrated and almost looked like it was made half out of bone and the other half of steel. Aya finally started to look nervous as the beast had her in its clutches. Thinking that her life was soon to be over, Aiko started pleading in her head. "Someone, anyone. Please, help us." She felt a warmth in her pocket but ignored it. "With the strings of my lyre, I enchant. By the sound of my voice I command. Answer to the siren's call." Aiko saw the dagger shine brightly and a similar color coming from the floor behind the beast after Aya's strange chant. She failed to see the red circle at the doorway as well. The two women and the beast were able to see after the flash of light and a yell came from the monster holding onto Aya's wrist. That yell turned almost instantly into a gurgle. What appeared to be a solid structure of light burst through the monster's skull. Aiko was now even more terrified at seeing things that could only be from a fantasy story. And the fanatical monster before her being ended like it was nothing. She could see the profile of her partner's face. But didn't understand why she had that wistful smile. The beast had started to fall forward towards Aya, only to be stopped by whatever had appeared behind it. And was then thrown away to the side. Aiko gasped at what she saw. A teenage boy, around 15 years old she could guess. He stood there with concern written all over his face. He stood shirtless and wet, his baggy pajama pants having moisture on them as well. Clearly having pulled them on just before arriving here, probably just after bathing. What surprised Aiko was the 8 wings coming from his back, along with the halo above his head. And on the right side of his chest was a mark glowing the same gold that the dagger had. A ring of feathers, with some sort of old-looking string instrument in the center. She cringed, as it looked like it was carved into his chest with a blade. The teen boy knelt down to Aya, bringing her into a tight hug, which she easily returned. The strange events of the last few minutes had left her unable to speak, her human mind overloaded with things that she had written off as fiction. "Were you called here as well?" she heard the boy say, still looking at Aya. Both him and her partner looked over to the doorway. She followed their line of sight and saw another young man, taller than the winged one. Black hair, violet eyes, and a build that screamed of hidden strength. His face was just north of neutral as he watched a scene that had played out before him. You arrived just before me, so I stayed out of your way. I figured an 8-winged angel was more than enough. The boy nodded to the other. I see. Was this one not reported to be in the area? After a moment, the black-haired male answered. Not sure. I don't hold any human realm territory, so I wouldn't have been told if the stray was here. Which makes me wonder, how did a human get a flyer of mine? Then flashback. Aiko brought herself out of her memory of how she met Issei and Sarayerg and looked over to her partner. So are you and Issei not an item anymore? Aya scoffed at the thought. Them and I will be together until one of us dies. No one can change that. Not Ray, not Gabriel. With anyone else, Aiko would have questioned the stability of a relationship where the man was involved with another woman as possessive as Aya. But Aiko knew that supernatural people operated differently. She'd heard of how devils reincarnated people as their servants. And if a devil had sex with their servants, there was nothing that person's spouse could say or do about it. And Ray's okay with that. Her tone was a little more edgy than she meant it to be. Aya caught onto it but didn't let it affect her own. She nodded, then her face grew sour. From what she said, it's more likely that he'll have others too. Even through the thick sunglasses, Aiko could see the glare that Aya had. Ray mentioned some of the girls in the new school that Gabriel transferred him into. Apparently they're warming up to him rather quickly. Fucking sluts. It still boggled her mind. How did women from that walk of life accept that their husband would almost undoubtedly sleep with others? She had the facts, but the ideology behind it still confused her. I still don't get how those women can be alright with that. She voiced her confusion. Aya was rubbing her temples again. I asked Issei that same question before. Apparently, there's about a 5-to-1 female to male ratio. Issei is almost guaranteed to have women pining after him his whole life. A multi-partner relationship is all that some of them have ever known. She sounded defeated, reluctant, and afraid at the end. Aiko didn't like it when her partner acted like this, it made the rest of their shift awkward. She reached over and squeezed her partner's shoulder. A small bit of understanding suddenly coming to her. It was really only applicable in this situation. And with only one other woman in mind. Even I know that he'd never do anything to purposely hurt you, and I've only met the guy a few times. He's supposed to live for thousands of years, right? At least this way he won't be alone once you're gone. I can only imagine how hard that'll be for him. Any further conversation was taken away from the frantic voice over the police radio. 10-33, 10-35. 10-33, 10-35. Unit 417 requesting anyone on north side to respond to Ogata Dental. 7 hostiles. They fucking butchered people inside. The voice of their fellow officer brought Aiko out of her desire to soothe her friend and partner. Aya completely forgot about her hangover at hearing the radio call. 10-33 was the code for an emergency, 10-35 meant a major crime alert. This was what they both signed up for. Catch the bad guys. And they just happened to be a little over a mile away at the moment. Throwing the car into gear, flipping the switch for the lights and sirens, the duo mentally prepared themselves for action. When they got on scene, the man that made the distress call was dead, an arm dangling by a thread of muscle tissue, his head caved in by a blunt object. They found what was guessed to 13 bodies inside. It was hard to tell, because they were all in pieces. Aya and Aiko were the only two that didn't need to go outside and throw up from the violence in front of them. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.